December 15, 1944, near the village of Malmedy in the Belgian Ardennes, the morning mist clung to the frozen ground like a shroud over the battlefield. Staff Sergeant William Duke Robinson of the 761st Tank Battalion crouched behind the twisted remains of his Sherman tank, the acrid smell of burning fuel and rubber filling his nostrils as German voices echoed through the winter forest. The men of his unit believed they were witnessing just another skirmish in what would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge, confident that American industrial might and superior firepower would see them through to victory by Christmas. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What none of them could have imagined was that this moment would transform not only the life of one captured soldier, but the very souls of his captors, proving that even in humanity's darkest hour, the power of dignity and compassion could triumph over hatred and prejudice. Staff Sergeant William Robinson had enlisted in the Army in 1942 from his hometown of Detroit, Michigan, where he had worked in the Ford River Rouge plant before the conflict began. At 25 years old, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders earned from years of factory work, and possessed what his commanding officers described as natural leadership qualities that made him invaluable to the 761st Tank Battalion. The unit was part of the segregated American forces, one of only 2 African-American tank battalions to see combat in the European theater, and Robinson had quickly risen through the ranks due to his mechanical expertise and calm demeanor under pressure. The German offensive that began on December 16th had caught Allied forces completely off guard, with over 200,000 German troops launching a massive counterattack through the Ardennes forest. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army had broken through American lines with devastating effectiveness, supported by the 6th Panzer Army under Sepp Dietrich and the 7th Army commanded by Erich Brandenberger. The operation, known to the Germans as Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, represented the largest deployment of German armor since the invasion of France in 1940, with over 1,000 tanks and assault guns participating in the offensive. Robinson's tank crew had been part of a desperate rearguard action attempting to slow the German advance while American infantry units retreated to more defensible positions. Their Sherman M4A3E8, nicknamed Detroit Steel by the crew, had accounted for 2 German Panzer Mark IV tanks, before taking a direct hit from a Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon. The explosion had taken the life of Gunner Private James Washington and Loader Corporal Miguel Santos, while Driver Private First Class Tommy Chen had suffered severe injuries to his legs that prevented him from moving without assistance. As German infantry advanced through the forest, Robinson made the agonizing decision to surrender rather than allow his wounded driver to suffer further. He emerged from behind the burning tank with his hands raised, calling out in the few German phrases he had learned from intelligence briefings. The approaching soldiers wore the distinctive camouflage uniforms of the Waffen-SS, members of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, one of the most elite units in the German military hierarchy. Oberführer Klaus Dietrich, commanding officer of the local SS battle group, was a career military officer who had served with distinction on the Eastern Front before being transferred to the Western Theater. Standing 5 feet 10 inches tall with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes, Dietrich embodied the racial ideology that had been drilled into every member of his unit since their recruitment. Born in Munich in 1908, he had joined the party in 1929 and believed fervently in the superiority of the German race and the inferiority of all others, particularly those of African descent. When Dietrich first laid eyes on Robinson, emerging from the burning tank wreckage, his reaction was one of genuine surprise, followed by contempt. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered an African-American soldier in combat, as German propaganda had consistently portrayed the American military as composed entirely of white troops. The sight of this tall, dignified man in an American uniform challenged everything Dietrich had been taught about racial hierarchies and military effectiveness. The initial capture proceeded according to standard protocols, with German soldiers searching Robinson for weapons and intelligence materials, while Chen received basic medical attention for his wounds. Robinson's calm demeanor and obvious military bearing impressed some of the younger German soldiers, who had expected to find a cowering, subservient individual based on their ideological training. Instead, they encountered a professional soldier who carried himself with dignity despite the circumstances of his defeat. Dietrich ordered his men to establish a temporary holding area in the ruins of a farmhouse, approximately 2 kilometers from the site of the tank engagement. The building had been abandoned by its Belgian owners during the initial German advance, leaving behind sparse furnishings and a collection of religious artifacts that spoke to the family's deep Catholic faith. Robinson and Chen were placed in the farmhouse cellar, a stone-walled chamber that had originally served as a wine storage area, but now functioned as an improvised prison cell. The German treatment of Robinson during his first days of captivity reflected the systematic dehumanization that characterized their ideological training. Dietrich made it clear to his subordinates that this prisoner represented everything their movement opposed, referring to him using derogatory terms that reduced him to nothing more than a racial stereotype. The soldiers were encouraged to view Robinson as proof of American desperation, suggesting that only a military force on the verge of collapse would resort to arming what they considered racially inferior troops. Robinson's first meal in captivity consisted of watery soup made from potato peels and turnip scraps, served in a rusty can that had previously contained motor oil. The German soldiers watched with amusement as he examined the container, expecting him to complain or refuse the meager ration. Instead, Robinson cleaned the can as thoroughly as possible using water from a nearby bucket, then consumed the soup without comment, maintaining the same calm dignity he had displayed during his capture. The psychological warfare extended beyond mere humiliation as Dietrich implemented a systematic campaign designed to break Robinson's spirit and reinforce racial hierarchies within the German unit. Robinson was assigned the most degrading tasks available, including cleaning latrines, emptying waste buckets, and scrubbing floors on his hands and knees, while German soldiers watched and made comments about his supposed natural servility. These activities were designed not only to humiliate the prisoner, but also to reinforce ideological beliefs among the captors. Despite these conditions, Robinson maintained his military bearing and personal dignity, addressing his captors with formal courtesy and executing assigned tasks with thoroughness and professionalism. This response confounded many of the German soldiers, who had been taught that members of inferior races would either grovel for mercy or respond with animalistic aggression when properly motivated. Robinson's calm competence challenged these preconceptions in ways that made several younger soldiers visibly uncomfortable. Unteroffizier Hans Möller, a 22-year-old squad leader from the Bavarian countryside, found himself increasingly troubled by the treatment of the American prisoner. Möller had joined the military in 1942 after completing his mandatory labor service, motivated more by patriotic duty than ideological fervor. His father had been a veterinarian who treated animals with respect and kindness, teaching young Hans that all living creatures deserved basic dignity, regardless of their station in life. Möller's discomfort intensified when he observed Robinson's interactions with Chen, the wounded tank driver who shared the improvised prison cell. Rather than focusing on his own suffering or complaining about their treatment, Robinson dedicated himself to caring for his injured comrade, fashioning bandages from torn fabric and sharing his meager food rations despite his own hunger. This behavior directly contradicted everything Möller had been taught about racial selfishness and the supposed inability of inferior races to form meaningful bonds with others. The routine of humiliation continued for nearly 2 weeks, with Robinson subjected to increasingly creative forms of degradation designed by Dietrich and his senior non-commissioned officers. They forced him to sing American popular songs while performing menial labor, expecting him to choose stereotypical minstrel songs that would reinforce their racial prejudices. Instead, Robinson selected patriotic hymns and military marching songs, delivering them with such dignity and conviction that even his captors fell silent during the performances. On December 28th, a supply convoy arrived at the farmhouse carrying medical supplies and replacement equipment for Dietrich's battle group. Among the new arrivals was Hauptscharführer Franz Weber, a combat medic who had served on the Eastern Front for 3 years before being transferred to the Western Theater due to injuries sustained during the siege of Stalingrad. Weber brought with him not only medical expertise, but also a war-weary perspective that had stripped away many of his original ideological certainties. Weber's first encounter with Robinson occurred when he was summoned to examine Chen's deteriorating condition, as the young driver's leg wounds had become infected due to inadequate medical care. The American prisoner had done everything possible to tend to his comrade's injuries, creating makeshift antiseptic solutions from available materials and maintaining the wounds as clean as circumstances allowed. Weber was immediately struck by the sophistication of Robinson's medical improvisation and the obvious care he had taken to preserve his fellow soldier's life. During his examination of Chen, Weber found himself drawn into conversation with Robinson about medical procedures and treatment options. The American sergeant displayed surprising knowledge of anatomy and first aid techniques, explaining that he had completed advanced medical training before specializing in tank operations. Robinson's clinical descriptions of Chen's condition and his suggestions for treatment impressed Weber, who realized he was conversing with someone possessing genuine intellectual capabilities rather than the racial inferior described in German propaganda. Weber made the decision to provide proper medical care for Chen, despite knowing that such treatment exceeded standard protocols for enemy prisoners. He cleaned and dressed the wounds properly, administered antibiotics from his medical supplies, and provided pain medication to ease the young soldier's suffering. Robinson watched these procedures with intense interest, asking intelligent questions about dosages and treatment duration that revealed his sophisticated understanding of medical science. The relationship between Weber and Robinson evolved rapidly over the following days, as the German medic found himself seeking out conversations with the American prisoner about topics ranging from medical techniques to mechanical engineering. Robinson's insights into tank maintenance and repair impressed Weber, who had struggled with mechanical problems affecting German vehicles throughout the campaign. The prisoner's willingness to share technical knowledge, even with his captors, demonstrated a level of professional integrity that Weber had rarely encountered among his own comrades. These conversations did not go unnoticed by other members of the German unit, particularly Müller, who found himself drawn to listen whenever Weber and Robinson discussed technical or medical subjects. The young Bavarian was fascinated by Robinson's obvious education and expertise, which challenged every assumption he had been taught about racial capabilities and intelligence. Müller began to question whether the ideological training he had received was based on accurate information or systematic distortion designed to support predetermined conclusions. Dietrich's awareness of these developing relationships led to increased pressure on his subordinates to maintain proper ideological distance from the prisoner. He reminded his men repeatedly that fraternization with enemy troops was forbidden under military regulations, and that any sympathy for racially inferior captives represented a betrayal of their fundamental beliefs and military duties. The Oberfuhrer implemented additional restrictions on contact with Robinson, limiting interactions to essential supervisory functions only. Despite these restrictions, the influence of Robinson's dignity and competence continued to spread throughout the German unit in subtle but meaningful ways. Soldiers who had initially participated enthusiastically in his humiliation began to feel uncomfortable with the systematic degradation, particularly when they observed his continued professionalism and concern for his wounded comrade. The contrast between Robinson's behavior and their own treatment of him created a cognitive dissonance that challenged their basic assumptions about moral superiority. The turning point came on January 2, 1945, when a German supply truck struck a mine on the road leading to the farmhouse, severely injuring the driver and creating a medical emergency that overwhelmed Weber's capabilities. The explosion had caused massive trauma to the driver's chest and abdomen, requiring immediate surgical intervention that exceeded the facilities available at the remote location. Weber found himself facing the possibility of losing a German soldier due to inadequate medical resources, a situation that filled him with professional frustration and personal anguish. Robinson observed the frantic medical efforts from his position near the farmhouse entrance, where he had been assigned to unload supplies from the damaged truck. When Weber's initial treatment attempts proved insufficient to stabilize the injured driver, Robinson quietly approached the German medic and offered his assistance in performing emergency surgery. Weber's initial reaction was to refuse, knowing that accepting help from a prisoner would violate every protocol and ideology that governed his military service. However, as the injured driver's condition continued to deteriorate, and it became clear that Weber lacked the surgical skills necessary to address the complex trauma, the German medic faced an impossible choice between ideological purity and human life. Robinson explained that he had assisted in numerous emergency surgical procedures during his medical training, and that he possessed both the knowledge and steady hands necessary to perform the life-saving intervention. Weber found himself staring into the calm, competent eyes of a man he had been taught to consider subhuman, realizing that this supposed inferior might be the only person capable of saving a German life. The decision to accept Robinson's assistance represented a fundamental betrayal of everything Dietrich's unit had been taught about racial hierarchies and military protocol. Weber made the choice based purely on medical necessity, but the implications extended far beyond the immediate surgical situation. By acknowledging Robinson's superior capabilities and accepting his help in saving a German life, Weber was implicitly rejecting the entire ideological foundation upon which his military service was based. The emergency surgery took place in the farmhouse kitchen, with Weber providing assistance while Robinson performed the primary surgical procedures using improvised instruments sterilized over an open fire. The American prisoner worked with confident precision, explaining each step of the procedure as he progressed and instructing Weber in advanced techniques that the German medic had never encountered. Robinson's calm competence under extreme pressure impressed every German soldier who witnessed the operation, creating an undeniable demonstration of capability that shattered preconceived racial assumptions. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours, during which Robinson maintained complete focus on saving the life of a man who belonged to the same military force that had subjected him to weeks of systematic humiliation. He showed no hesitation or reluctance in providing the best possible care, treating the injured German with the same professionalism and dedication he would have shown to an American soldier. This behavior represented everything that Dietrich's ideological training insisted was impossible for someone of Robinson's racial background. When the surgery was completed and the injured driver's condition had stabilized, Weber found himself in the unprecedented position of owing his patient's life to an enemy prisoner whom his own ideology deemed racially inferior. The German medic struggled to reconcile this reality with everything he had been taught about human value and military hierarchy, realizing that his most basic assumptions about the world had been fundamentally challenged by the events of a single afternoon. Müller, who had observed the entire surgical procedure with fascination and growing respect, approached Robinson afterward to express his gratitude for saving a German life. The young Bavarian's words came haltingly as he struggled to find appropriate language for thanking someone he had been taught to despise and dehumanize. Robinson accepted the thanks with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout his captivity, explaining simply that saving human life was a moral obligation that transcended military or racial boundaries. The aftermath of the surgery created a profound shift in the dynamics within Dietrich's unit, as soldiers who had witnessed Robinson's competence and dedication began to question the validity of their ideological training. Conversations developed among the younger enlisted men about the obvious contradiction between what they had been taught about racial inferiority and what they had observed with their own eyes. These discussions took place quietly and carefully, as open questioning of official ideology carried severe consequences within the military hierarchy. Dietrich's reaction to these developments was one of mounting anger and concern, as he recognized the threat that Robinson's behavior posed to the ideological cohesion of his unit. The Oberfuhrer increased his efforts to maintain proper racial attitudes among his subordinates, reminding them repeatedly that individual examples of competence did not invalidate broader racial truths. He insisted that Robinson's medical skills were anomalous and that his willingness to save German lives represented nothing more than calculated self-preservation rather than genuine humanitarian concern. Despite Dietrich's efforts to maintain ideological discipline, the influence of Robinson's example continued to spread throughout the unit in ways that proved impossible to contain. Soldiers began to treat both prisoners with noticeably more consideration, providing better food rations and allowing Chen to receive regular medical attention from Weber. These changes occurred gradually and subtly, but they represented a fundamental shift away from the systematic dehumanization that had characterized the early weeks of captivity. Weber's relationship with Robinson evolved into something approaching professional collegiality, as the German medic sought to learn advanced medical techniques from his supposed inferior. Their conversations ranged across complex medical topics, with Robinson sharing knowledge gained through years of training and practical experience. Weber found himself increasingly impressed by the depth and sophistication of Robinson's understanding, which far exceeded his own capabilities in many areas of medical science. The educational exchange extended beyond medical topics, as Robinson demonstrated expertise in mechanical engineering, metallurgy, and industrial production that reflected his background in Detroit's automotive industry. German soldiers who had previously mocked his racial background found themselves seeking his advice on technical problems, ranging from vehicle maintenance to equipment repair. Robinson provided this assistance willingly and competently, gradually earning the grudging respect of men who had initially viewed him as less than human. Müller's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic among the German soldiers, as his conversations with Robinson challenged every assumption about racial hierarchy that had shaped his worldview. The young Bavarian began to see the American prisoner as an individual with thoughts, feelings, and capabilities that matched or exceeded his own, rather than as a representative of an inferior race. This personal recognition of Robinson's humanity created an internal conflict that ultimately led Müller to question the entire ideological foundation of his military service. The changing attitudes within the unit did not escape Dietrich's attention, and the Oberfuhrer responded with increasingly harsh measures designed to reassert proper racial hierarchy. He separated Robinson from Chen, moving the American prisoner to an isolated shed where contact with German soldiers would be minimized. Additional restrictions were placed on conversations between prisoners and guards, with severe punishments promised for any unauthorized fraternization or discussion of non-essential topics. These measures proved largely ineffective in reversing the psychological changes that Robinson's example had created among the German soldiers. The respect he had earned through competence and dignity could not be erased through administrative directives or ideological lectures. Instead, Dietrich's harsh restrictions created additional sympathy for Robinson among soldiers who had witnessed his contributions to their unit and recognized his fundamental humanity despite official designations of racial inferiority. The situation reached a crisis point on January 10th, when American forces began a counter-offensive designed to eliminate the German salient created during the Battle of the Bulge. Artillery bombardments and airstrikes increased dramatically as Allied forces pressed their advantage, forcing Dietrich's unit to consider retreat from their current positions. The presence of prisoners complicated evacuation plans, as German resources were already stretched thin by combat losses and supply difficulties. Under normal circumstances, the inconvenience of transporting prisoners during a tactical withdrawal might have led to their elimination, a practice that had become increasingly common among German units under extreme pressure. However, the relationships that Robinson had developed with Weber, Müller, and other soldiers created an unexpected level of protection, as these men found themselves unwilling to participate in or permit actions that would harm someone they had come to respect and value as an individual. Weber took the initiative in approaching Dietrich with a proposal for managing the prisoner situation during the anticipated withdrawal. The medic argued that Robinson's medical skills made him too valuable to lose, particularly given the increasing number of German casualties requiring treatment. Weber suggested that the American prisoner could provide essential medical support during the retreat, saving German lives that might otherwise be lost due to inadequate medical resources. Müller supported Weber's proposal, adding that Robinson's mechanical expertise had proven invaluable in maintaining German equipment under difficult field conditions. The young Bavarian pointed out that several vehicles in their unit had been repaired using techniques suggested by the American prisoner, and that his continued assistance might prove essential to their survival during the challenging withdrawal ahead. These practical arguments provided a rational justification for protecting Robinson that bypassed ideological considerations. Dietrich found himself facing an impossible choice between ideological purity and military necessity, as his most trusted subordinates argued for preserving the life of a man he considered racially inferior. The Oberfuhrer's worldview demanded that he reject such arguments as contamination by enemy propaganda, but the practical realities of their military situation made Robinson's expertise genuinely valuable. Dietrich struggled to reconcile these competing demands while maintaining his authority over soldiers whose loyalty was increasingly divided. The debate over Robinson's fate was resolved by external events rather than internal discussion, as American forces launched a coordinated attack that forced immediate German withdrawal from their current positions. The speed and intensity of the Allied assault left no time for lengthy deliberations about prisoner management, requiring instant decisions based on immediate tactical necessities rather than ideological preferences. In the chaos of rapid retreat, Robinson found himself included in the German evacuation simply because Weber and Müller refused to leave him behind. The withdrawal proceeded under extremely difficult conditions as American artillery maintained constant pressure on the retreating German columns. Robinson's medical skills proved immediately valuable when Weber was wounded by shell fragments, leaving the unit without adequate medical support for its casualties. The American prisoner took charge of treating German wounded without being asked, working alongside Müller to provide life-saving care under fire while maintaining the calm professionalism that had characterized his behavior throughout captivity. Robinson's treatment of German casualties during the retreat created the final transformation in attitudes among Dietrich's remaining soldiers, as they witnessed him risking his own life to save theirs, despite months of systematic humiliation and abuse. The sight of this supposedly inferior individual providing competent medical care to German soldiers under combat conditions shattered the last vestiges of racial prejudice among men who had begun the campaign as true believers in ideological superiority. Müller's personal transformation was completed when Robinson treated a severe abdominal wound that the young Bavarian had sustained during the American artillery bombardment. As Robinson worked to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition, Müller found himself looking into the eyes of a man who embodied everything he'd been taught to despise, yet who was dedicating himself completely to preserving a German life. The recognition of Robinson's fundamental humanity and moral superiority created an internal revolution that rejected everything Müller had previously believed about racial hierarchy. The German retreat continued for 3 days through harsh winter conditions, with Robinson providing essential medical support for casualties while also assisting with vehicle maintenance and tactical planning. His contributions to German survival became so obvious and valuable that even Dietrich was forced to acknowledge their importance, though the Oberfuhrer continued to struggle with the ideological implications of depending on someone he considered racially inferior for essential military functions. Chen's condition improved dramatically under Robinson's continued care, despite the harsh conditions of the retreat and the limited medical supplies available. The wounded driver's recovery served as additional evidence of Robinson's medical competence, as Weber acknowledged privately that his own efforts had been insufficient to save the young soldier's life. The debt that the German medical unit owed to their prisoner created bonds of gratitude and respect that transcended racial and military boundaries. On January 13th, American forces finally caught up with the retreating German column, surrounding Dietrich's remaining troops in a small Belgian village that offered limited defensive positions. The end of German resistance became inevitable as Allied forces demonstrated overwhelming superiority in numbers, equipment, and air support. Faced with certain defeat and the prospect of capture, Dietrich was forced to make final decisions about the fate of his American prisoners. Weber and Müller approached their commanding officer together, making a joint plea for Robinson's proper treatment when German forces surrendered to Allied troops. The two soldiers argued that the American prisoner had saved numerous German lives during their retreat, demonstrating valor and medical skill that deserved recognition rather than punishment. They requested that Dietrich formally acknowledge Robinson's contributions in the surrender documents, ensuring that his actions would be properly recorded and recognized. Dietrich's response to this request revealed the extent of his personal transformation during the preceding weeks of contact with Robinson. The Oberfuhrer admitted privately that his assumptions about racial hierarchy had been challenged by undeniable evidence of the American prisoner's capabilities and character. While he could not publicly renounce the ideology that had shaped his military career, Dietrich acknowledged that Robinson had demonstrated qualities of competence, courage, and compassion that demanded respect, regardless of racial background. The formal surrender took place in the village church, with American forces accepting the capitulation of Dietrich's remaining troops according to established protocols. Robinson's status as a liberated prisoner created an unusual situation, as he had spent the final days of German captivity functioning essentially as a medical officer within an enemy unit. His treatment of German wounded and his contributions to their survival complicated standard narratives about prisoner-captor relationships and challenged assumptions about loyalty and humanity during wartime. Captain James Morrison of the 101st Airborne Division, who accepted Dietrich's surrender, was initially puzzled by the obvious respect that German soldiers showed toward Robinson during the capitulation ceremony. Several German troops approached the American prisoner to express personal gratitude for medical treatment they had received, behavior that seemed inconsistent with expected prisoner-captor dynamics. Morrison's confusion deepened when Weber formally requested that Robinson's medical contributions to German forces be recorded in official surrender documents. The explanation provided by Weber and Müller revealed the extraordinary transformation that had taken place within Dietrich's unit during the preceding month of combat and retreat. These German soldiers described how Robinson's dignity, competence, and humanitarian concern had challenged their fundamental assumptions about racial hierarchy and human value. They spoke of medical procedures that had saved German lives, mechanical expertise that had kept their equipment functioning, and personal courage that had been demonstrated under fire during their retreat. Morrison found himself documenting one of the most unusual prisoner-of-war situations in his military experience, as former captors praised their prisoner's character and requested formal recognition of his contributions to their survival. The testimony provided by German soldiers painted a picture of transformation that extended far beyond standard military narratives, revealing how individual human dignity could overcome systematic indoctrination and institutional prejudice even in the extremes of combat. Robinson's own response to these testimonials was characteristically modest and professional, as he explained to Morrison that medical care and technical assistance were moral obligations that transcended military boundaries. The liberated prisoner displayed no bitterness toward his former captors, acknowledging that several German soldiers had treated him with increasing respect and kindness as their relationship developed. Robinson's forgiveness and understanding impressed Morrison, who recognized qualities of character that deserved formal recognition and documentation. The immediate aftermath of liberation saw Robinson reunited with surviving members of his original tank unit, including Chen, whose recovery from his wounds had been ensured by Robinson's continuous medical care throughout their captivity. The reunion was emotional but subdued, as both soldiers had been profoundly affected by their experiences of capture, imprisonment, and unexpected human connections with former enemies. Chen credited Robinson with saving his life multiple times, both through immediate medical intervention and ongoing care under difficult conditions. Weber's wounds healed successfully under American medical care, but the German medic's psychological recovery proved more complex as he struggled to integrate his transformed worldview with the reality of military defeat. In conversations with American medical personnel, Weber spoke repeatedly about Robinson's medical expertise and humanitarian character, expressing regret for the treatment he had received during the early weeks of captivity. The German medic's obvious respect for his former prisoner impressed American officers, who documented these testimonials for intelligence purposes. Mueller's physical wounds proved less severe than initially feared, but like Weber, he faced the challenge of reconstructing his fundamental beliefs about human nature and racial hierarchy. The young Bavarian soldier had experienced a complete transformation of worldview during his contact with Robinson, rejecting the ideological training that had shaped his military service. Mueller's conversations with American interrogators revealed the profound impact that personal contact with Robinson had made on his understanding of human dignity and moral responsibility. Dietrich's capture and subsequent interrogation provided American intelligence officers with valuable insights into the psychological effects of racial integration within military units. The German commander's testimony revealed how contact with a competent, dignified African-American soldier had challenged ideological assumptions throughout his unit, creating divisions and doubt that undermined military cohesion. Dietrich acknowledged that Robinson's presence had forced him to confront contradictions between theoretical racial hierarchy and observed individual capabilities. The broader implications of Robinson's experience extended beyond individual transformation to institutional questions about racial integration and military effectiveness. American military leadership recognized that his performance under extreme conditions provided compelling evidence for the capabilities of African-American soldiers, supporting arguments for expanded integration of military units. Robinson's technical expertise, medical skills, and leadership qualities demonstrated the waste of human resources created by segregated military policies. Weber's decision to immigrate to the United States after the war was directly influenced by his contact with Robinson and the respect he had developed for American medical practices. The former German medic settled in Detroit, where he worked in the same hospital system that employed Robinson after his return from military service. Their professional relationship continued for decades, with Weber frequently crediting Robinson with teaching him advanced medical techniques that saved numerous lives throughout his civilian medical career. Mueller's post-war life was similarly transformed by his wartime contact with Robinson, as the former German soldier became an advocate for racial equality and human rights in his native Bavaria. Mueller frequently spoke about his military experiences, emphasizing how personal contact with Robinson had revealed the falseness of racial prejudice and the importance of judging individuals by their character rather than their ancestry. His testimonials became part of denazification efforts designed to educate German civilians about the reality of American military capabilities and racial diversity. The documented friendship between Robinson and his former captors became a subject of study for military psychologists interested in understanding how human relationships could transcend ideological indoctrination and institutional prejudice. Their correspondence during the post-war years revealed continued mutual respect and affection that challenged standard assumptions about prisoner-captor relationships and the permanence of wartime enmities. Robinson's willingness to maintain friendships with former enemies impressed observers as evidence of exceptional character and moral development. Chen's recovery was complete by the spring of 1945, allowing him to return to active military service for the final months of the European conflict. His testimony about Robinson's medical care and leadership during their captivity contributed to recommendations for military decorations and formal recognition of exceptional service under extreme conditions. Chen credited Robinson with not only saving his life, but also demonstrating principles of military professionalism and human dignity that inspired his own subsequent service and civilian career. The 761st Tank Battalion's official records documented Robinson's exceptional service during his captivity, noting his medical contributions to both American and German wounded, his maintenance of military discipline under extreme conditions, and his demonstration of leadership qualities that earned respect from enemies as well as comrades. These citations supported Robinson's promotion to technical sergeant and his assignment to advanced medical training that utilized the expertise he had demonstrated under combat conditions. Robinson's post-war civilian career in medicine was directly influenced by his wartime experiences, as he completed advanced training in surgical techniques and trauma care that built upon the emergency procedures he had performed while in German captivity. His medical practice in Detroit specialized in treating veterans of all nationalities, reflecting his belief that healthcare was a human right that transcended military or racial boundaries. Robinson's reputation for exceptional surgical skills and compassionate care attracted patients from throughout the Midwest. The correspondence between Robinson and Weber continued until Weber's death in 1987, with regular exchanges that documented their ongoing friendship and mutual respect. Weber's letters frequently expressed gratitude for the medical knowledge he had gained from Robinson during their wartime contact, crediting his former prisoner with teaching techniques that had saved hundreds of lives throughout his medical career. Robinson's responses demonstrated continued forgiveness and understanding, acknowledging the courage it had taken for Weber to challenge military ideology in order to provide proper medical care for prisoners. Möller's transformation from ideological soldier to human rights advocate became a model for successful denazification and democratic education in post-war Germany. His speaking engagements throughout Bavaria emphasized how personal contact with Robinson had revealed the humanity that existed beyond racial stereotypes, encouraging audiences to reject prejudice based on superficial characteristics. Wöhrle's testimonials contributed to broader efforts to educate German civilians about the reality of American diversity and the contributions of minorities to Allied victory. The broader historical significance of Robinson's experience lay in its demonstration that individual dignity and competence could overcome systematic prejudice and institutional indoctrination even under extreme conditions. His transformation of former enemies into lifelong friends provided evidence that human understanding could transcend the artificial divisions created by political ideology and racial hierarchy. Robinson's story became part of arguments for military integration and civil rights advancement that contributed to social progress throughout the post-war period. The medical techniques that Robinson had improvised during his captivity were later studied and refined by military medical personnel, contributing to advances in emergency trauma care that saved lives throughout subsequent conflicts. His demonstration that surgical procedures could be performed successfully under primitive field conditions influenced military medical training and encouraged the development of portable surgical equipment for combat medics. Robinson's innovations in medical improvisation became part of standard training curricula for military medical personnel. Weber's immigration to the United States and his successful medical career represented the positive potential for former enemies to become productive contributors to American society when given opportunities for redemption and growth. His friendship with Robinson served as a model for post-war reconciliation and demonstrated that wartime enmities need not be permanent when based on ideological misunderstanding rather than fundamental character differences. Weber's gratitude toward his former prisoner influenced his own treatment of patients throughout his medical career. The documentation of Robinson's exceptional character and military service contributed to broader recognition of African American contributions to Allied victory, supporting arguments for equal treatment and expanded opportunities in both military and civilian contexts. His demonstration of technical expertise, medical competence, and leadership qualities under extreme conditions challenged racial stereotypes and provided evidence for the capabilities of minority soldiers. Robinson's example became part of historical narratives that emphasized the diversity of American military personnel and their collective contributions to victory. The friendship between Robinson and his former captors continued to attract scholarly attention throughout the post-war period, as historians and psychologists studied the factors that enabled such dramatic transformation of attitudes and relationships. Their correspondence provided valuable insights into the process of overcoming prejudice through personal contact and the development of mutual respect based on observed character rather than racial assumptions. Robinson's willingness to forgive and maintain friendships with former enemies was recognized as exceptional evidence of moral development and human understanding. Müller's advocacy for racial equality in post-war Germany drew directly upon his wartime experiences with Robinson as he used personal testimony to challenge prejudice and promote understanding among German civilians. His speaking engagements emphasized the contrast between the racial inferiority that German propaganda had described and the competent, dignified individual he had encountered during military service. Müller's transformation from believer to skeptic provided powerful evidence for the effectiveness of personal contact in overcoming systematic indoctrination. The medical innovations that Robinson had developed during his captivity were later incorporated into standard emergency medical procedures, contributing to improved trauma care that benefited both military and civilian patients. His demonstration that sophisticated surgical procedures could be performed under primitive conditions influenced the development of emergency medical protocols that emphasized adaptability and improvisation when standard equipment was unavailable. Robinson's medical expertise became part of training programs that prepared medical personnel for service under challenging conditions. Chen's complete recovery and subsequent military service provided additional testimony to Robinson's medical competence, as military medical personnel acknowledged that the wounded driver would not have survived without the continuous care he had received from his fellow prisoner. Chen's gratitude toward Robinson influenced his own post-war career in veterans services, as he dedicated himself to ensuring that other wounded soldiers received the quality of care that had saved his own life. The friendship between Robinson and Chen continued throughout their civilian lives, representing a bond forged under extreme conditions and strengthened by mutual respect and gratitude. Robinson's post-war recognition included military decorations for exceptional service under extreme conditions, civilian honors for his medical contributions to veterans' healthcare, and academic recognition for his innovations in emergency medical procedures. His transformation of former enemies into lifelong friends was cited as exceptional evidence of character and moral development that transcended the ordinary expectations of military service. Robinson's story became part of educational curricula designed to teach principles of human dignity and the potential for understanding across racial and cultural boundaries. Weber's successful integration into American society and his distinguished medical career demonstrated the potential for former enemies to become valued contributors when given opportunities for redemption and growth. His continued friendship with Robinson influenced his treatment of patients throughout his career, as he applied lessons learned about human dignity and compassionate care. Weber's testimonials about Robinson's character contributed to broader understanding of the individual qualities that enable exceptional service under extreme conditions. The correspondence between Robinson and his former captors was preserved in military archives and academic collections, providing future researchers with detailed documentation of how personal relationships could transcend institutional prejudice and ideological indoctrination. Their letters revealed continued mutual respect and affection that challenged standard assumptions about the permanence of wartime enmities. Robinson's generosity in maintaining these friendships was recognized as evidence of exceptional character and moral development. The broader historical legacy of Robinson's experience contributed to arguments for military integration and civil rights advancement that influenced social progress throughout the post-war period. His demonstration of competence, dignity, and leadership under extreme conditions provided evidence that challenged racial stereotypes and supported expanded opportunities for minority participation in military and civilian contexts. Robinson's story became part of narratives that emphasized the diversity of American contributions to Allied victory and the importance of recognizing individual merit regardless of racial background. The transformation of Dietrich's unit from ideological believers to respectful admirers of Robinson demonstrated the potential for personal contact to overcome systematic prejudice and institutional indoctrination. Their testimonials about Robinson's character and contributions provided valuable insights into the factors that enabled dramatic shifts in attitudes and relationships. The German soldiers' willingness to acknowledge their transformed understanding and to maintain post-war contact with their former prisoner represented exceptional evidence of human capacity for growth and change. Müller's advocacy for human rights in post-war Germany drew directly upon his wartime transformation through contact with Robinson, as he used personal testimony to promote understanding and challenge prejudice among German civilians. His speaking engagements emphasized the importance of judging individuals by their character rather than their ancestry, using his own experience as evidence for the falseness of racial hierarchy. Müller's transformation from true believer to advocate for equality provided powerful testimony about the potential for personal growth and moral development. The medical knowledge that Weber had gained from Robinson during their wartime contact influenced his entire civilian career, as he applied advanced techniques and compassionate principles throughout his service in American hospitals. Weber's gratitude toward his former prisoner was expressed through decades of exceptional patient care that reflected lessons learned about human dignity and medical ethics. His testimonials about Robinson's medical expertise contributed to broader recognition of the individual capabilities that transcended racial stereotypes. Robinson's civilian medical career built upon the expertise he had demonstrated under combat conditions, as he completed advanced training in surgical techniques and trauma care that utilized his wartime innovations. His medical practice specialized in treating veterans of all nationalities, reflecting his belief that healthcare was a fundamental human right that transcended military or racial boundaries. Robinson's reputation for surgical excellence and compassionate care attracted patients from throughout the region and contributed to advances in medical techniques. The friendship between Robinson and his former captors continued to provide evidence for the potential of human understanding to overcome artificial divisions created by political ideology and racial prejudice. Their correspondence documented continued mutual respect and affection that challenged assumptions about the permanence of wartime enmities. Robinson's willingness to forgive and maintain these relationships was recognized as exceptional evidence of character and moral development that inspired others facing similar challenges. Chen's gratitude toward Robinson influenced his entire post-war life as he dedicated himself to veterans services that ensured other wounded soldiers received quality medical care. Chen's career was shaped by his recognition of how Robinson's continuous care had saved his life during their captivity and influenced his recovery throughout the post-war period. The friendship between Robinson and Chen provided an example of bonds forged under extreme conditions and strengthened by mutual respect and shared experience. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.